This is how Bob Menendez wakes up every morning. He looks in the mirror, and this is how he imagines himself dressing up like Uncle Sam with his striped red and white pants.
Mira que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
What I want to do is I want to start off by playing a clip. This is from Chris, your favorite senator, Bob Menendez, from your home state of New Jersey. I know it's somebody you love and really admire. So that's going to be really great to hear from him. And he's basically kicking off, again, this is from a U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee meeting on Tuesday, November 30th, just a few days ago, after all of the electoral victories Latin America and the Caribbean. So right now, U.S. imperialism is in a way kind of shitting its pants, thinking about how to re-strategize, how to re-implement imperialism. And it's interesting to note that we have people from both the Democratic and Republican parties scheming together. And it's really in these Senate Foreign Relations Committee meetings that you truly hear just how similar the Democrats and Republicans are in terms of advocating for the free market, neoliberalism, and all this other nonsense with just different creative approaches. So I'm going to play this clip and we're going to get your reaction.
In March, this committee hosted Organization of American States Secretary General Luis Almagro to review the state of democracy in the region. We heard concerns about the uptick in fraudulent elections, shrinking space for civil society and independent media, efforts to politicize judicial institutions, and the loss of hope in a region plagued by insecurity and kleptocracy. While the Inter-American Democratic Charter marked its 20th anniversary in September, the harsh reality is that we are witnessing a fraying of democratic consensus in the Americas. Given Secretary General Almagro's diagnosis, it is critical that the Biden administration continue efforts to restore the defense of democracy as a central pillar of U.S. foreign policy. In his June memorandum, the President made it clear that combating kleptocracy is a U.S. national security priority, and American diplomats are again using the language of human rights. After 4 years of the Trump administration failing to stand up for our fundamental values, we have acutely felt the effects, and these initial steps are welcome. But we must do more, because the truth is that since March, the situation in the hemisphere has become even more challenging. In Cuba, the Diaz-Canel regime attacked, detained, and disappeared its citizens for demanding fundamental freedoms during unprecedented countrywide protests in July. The regime paired physical assaults with internet shutdowns and decrees criminalizing free expression on social media. Terrified of the Cuban people's desire for change, it militarized the entire island to prevent protests in November. While I welcome the administration's 4 rounds of targeted sanctions, we must move more aggressively to hold security forces accountable. And we must launch a strategic effort to demilitarize the Cuban economy in parallel with our support for the Cuban people. In Nicaragua, the Ortega's regime relentless campaign to jail and persecute political opponents, civil society, and independent media resulted in the recent sham elections.
So a lot of nonsense and right-wing garbage and propaganda from Bob Menendez out of New Jersey, a Gusano, somebody who his family is right-wing Cubans, backstabbers to their nation, warmongers, as ILC Fishing says. And one thing I wanted to point before I get your reaction, Chris, is he uses the word kleptocracy. And just to give you all a definition of kleptocracy is wealth-influenced government whose corrupt leaders, kleptocrats, use political power to appropriate the wealth of their nation. And this is a term that has been used by the US imperialists for many years against the global South. And this stereotype, this propaganda that the people of the global South are just inherently corrupt, that these dictators just want to steal all the resources of their region without mentioning anything about imperialism, how the actual kleptocrats, the actual corrupt politicians in Latin America and the Caribbean are at the behest of Washington, of Wall Street. And he continues to regurgitate this claim that Latin America is just inherently kleptocratic. He also openly mentions that they've been using the quote language of human rights to try to advance sanctions. He even says, I welcome the 4 rounds of targeted sanctions, which are completely devastating to Cuba, to Nicaragua, to Venezuela. So it's interesting to hear all of that. Your reaction, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of reminiscent of. So there's a quote where Henry Kissinger was talking about Chile when they elected Salvador Allende, and he was talking about we can't let a country in South America go communist because of the stupidity of their own people. And it's like this constant like colonial view towards like people of the global South that we can't control our own politics and we're irresponsible, and if we just have leaders they're all going to be corrupt, and like so we have to have the US to manage our democracies, and all this all this bullshit that really has nothing to do with how political economic systems are actually set up and have been set up there for 500 years. When you look at Latin America, every single movement for national independence, national liberation, and this also goes for Africa and Asia as well, has been completely assaulted by imperialism as soon as it builds any type of momentum. And so the United States ironically puts all these so-called corrupt people in power. They put the Jovenel Moises in power. They put the they put the Bukeles in power. They put the Piñeras, the Pinochets, these folks in power, and then talk about, oh, look at how corrupt they are. When in reality they're just on the payroll of the CIA, and that's often a thing of people. People say, "Oh, well, you're just using the CIA as an excuse." Like, no, they're literally on the CIA payroll, and there's documents to prove that. For you can just look up documents of the past 20 years. It's absolutely true. And if you don't do what the CIA tells you, then you'll still be painted as corrupt because that's the image of South American politics or Latin American politics in general, or Caribbean politics in general. But a lot of times it's really not accurate when it comes to the people who are actually resisting that corruption and trying to fight that corruption, and fighting that corruption with socialism, which is the only way that you can fight that corruption. Giving power to the people, giving economic power to the people, giving political power to the people, and making sure that fascists don't have the ability to co-opt that. And then when fascist civil liberties are, mitigated, then they talk about, oh, they're corrupting democracy. And that's what you see with Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela and everywhere. So
this is how Bob Menendez wakes up every morning. He looks in the mirror, and this is how he imagines himself dressing up like Uncle Sam with his striped red and white pants and a little image of Cuba next to him. This is a political cartoon following the Spanish-American War. Political cartoons are very interesting because even though they were produced hundreds of years ago and were talking about totally different wars and conflicts, it can really be applied to the 21st century. And on the left, we see a shorter woman on her knees with a curtain or a cloth that says Cuba, and she's brown and she's a Cuban woman begging Uncle Sam to stay. And behind her, it says famine, pestilence, war, revolt. Everything's on fire. People are dying in the background. And mind you, this is pre-revolutionary Cuba. This is pre-socialism Cuba. So this narrative of like Uncle Sam having to come in and save the day has been repeated on and on since the 1800s. And on the right, you have what the US envisions as democracy in Latin America. says peace and prosperity. You have oil, and interestingly enough, you have smokestacks polluting the fuck out of the background, which is interesting. That's how they envision peace and prosperity. You have guajiros working, picking the sugar canes. You have industry and sunlight. So this is what Bob Menendez imagines himself looking like every day. And it's really disgusting to see that, because this is something that even to this day is so relevant. And as Deborah Rodriguez says, rogando que el Yankee le da migajas, exactly, begging the Yankee imperialists to give them crumbs of prosperity, of imperialism, when we know that a lot of that accumulated wealth of imperialism is taken, extracted through workers, through enslaved people, through the looting of resources, land, and people. And it's something that people like Bob Menendez, who claim that Cuba is the way it is horrible, and they claim that the US is amazing because of free market capitalism. So it's interesting to see that. By the way, have you ever, he's from your state of Jersey. Have you ever seen him or interacted with him? And what is his relationship like in Jersey? What do the people in Jersey think about him?
Shit. No, I've never personally interacted with him. I don't think he's someone who like tends to be around the people so much, unless it's like Union City or like a bastion of like Gusanos and shit. He gets elected because obviously New Jersey is a Democrat state. It's kind of controlled by that machine, and he's kind of the default candidate for Senate. The only time that I've been anywhere near him was when I did a protest. We did a protest to remove the sanctions off of Iran. So we did a protest at his house in this lily white suburb, Englewood Cliffs or Englewood Heights. I forgot the name of the damn town, but yeah, I mean, he's got a little modest house there, and obviously he's probably got a penthouse in Washington, and his apartments in Miami, and whatever offshore accounts. But yeah, I mean, he's usually the person that people vote for just because like that's the default guy. I don't think a lot of people interact with him or are aware of his politics or aware of maybe what's wrong with his politics. Even though he is a consistent warmonger, war especially by way of sanctions, blockades, if not outright bombing. And so again, when you get into like the whole thing of Democrats advocating war, it's always still warfare. They just decide to starve people through other means besides just sending in the Marines. So
he's the head Gusano. He's the chief Gusano in charge. So you got to go through him if you're
Marco Rubio's sugar daddy.
Marco Rubio's sugar daddy. Marco Rubio's like the junior Gusano. He's still Gusano in training.
So
he's still got to work his way up.